Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today we explain Exodus chapter 4 in a clear and simple way, step by step.
We have got a lot of ground to cover today. We will start by looking at the context and the three divine signs. Then we will see how Moses hesitates and how Aaron steps up to the plate. After that, we'll follow their journey back to Egypt, dive into a really strange nighttime encounter on the road, see how the people react to the signs, and finally wrap up with some practical key lessons from chapter 4.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, context and three divine signs, covering verses 1 through 9. To set the stage here, Moses is still standing right there at the mountain of God, Horeb, where God has literally just spoken to him from the burning bush. God has given him this absolutely monumental task of going to Pharaoh to free the Israelites. But right in verse 1, Moses immediately pushes back with a massive concern. He is terrified they just won't believe him. Now, in Hebrew, the root for the word believe here is aman, which is actually the exact same root as the word amen, meaning to confirm or support. So Moses fears the people will not find his words firm or reliable. He essentially asks, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord did not appear to you? And what is really fascinating here is that God answers him not with a sharp rebuke for his doubt, but with tangible, undeniable proof. God immediately asks Moses, what is that in your hand? Moses replies, a staff. In Hebrew, the word is mateh, which was a very well-recognized symbol of authority. God tells him to throw it on the ground. When he does, step 1 happens. The staff becomes a snake. The Hebrew word nahash is used here, and it's worth noting that the snake was a potent symbol in Egypt, specifically seen as the uraeus on Pharaoh's own crown. The text actually says Moses ran away from it, but God tells him, reach out and take it by the tail. When Moses obeys, it turns right back into a solid staff in his hand. God says this first sign is so the people will believe that the God of their fathers actually appeared to him. Then, God gives a second sign. He tells Moses to put his hand inside his cloak. When Moses pulls it out, his hand is leprous, described as being as white as snow. God tells him, put it back into the cloak, and when he pulls it out again, it is completely restored, looking just exactly like the rest of his flesh. Finally, step 3. God tells Moses that if they refuse to believe those first 2 miraculous signs, he is to take some water from the Nile River and pour it on dry ground. The very moment the water touches the dry ground, it will turn into blood. 3 specific miraculous signs. The crucial point here is that God is providing escalating, undeniable evidence. Just notice how the signs escalate in scale. It goes from an external tool of authority, his shepherd's staff, to his own physical flesh being cured of leprosy, all the way to a miracle that directly targets the Nile, which was literally the lifeblood of all of Egypt. It's like God is equipping Moses with a comprehensive, step-by-step backup plan, just in case the people refuse to listen to his words alone. Moving right along to section 2, Moses hesitates, Aaron steps up. This covers verses 10 through 17. Now, you would think that having the power to literally turn a snake into a snake and cure leprosy on the spot would give Moses absolute confidence, right? But moving to verse 10, we see that even with these incredible powers, Moses still hesitates and presents yet another excuse. Moses says to the Lord, O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. In the original Hebrew, Moses literally calls himself kevad peh and kevad lashon, heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue. Now, he isn't necessarily saying he has a stutter, he's saying his words carry weight poorly, or maybe he just lacks the smooth fluency of a native Egyptian diplomat. God's response in verse 11 is so powerful. He reminds Moses, who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? God is promising to be with Moses' mouth and teach him exactly what to say. But incredibly, in verse 13, Moses simply begs, O Lord, please send someone else to do it. Verse 14 tells us that at this flat refusal, the Lord's anger actually burned against Moses. But look closely at how God handles this. Even in his anger, he provides a highly practical solution to Moses' perceived weakness. God brings up Moses' brother, Aaron the Levite. God points out that Aaron can speak incredibly well, and in fact, Aaron is already on his way to meet Moses, and his heart will be glad to see him. God establishes a really clear chain of command here. Moses will put the words in Aaron's mouth. Aaron will be the mouthpiece, acting as the voice to the people, while Moses directs him, essentially acting as God to Aaron. And finally, God tells Moses to take that specific staff in his hand because that is exactly what he will use to perform the miraculous signs. Okay, let's get into section 3, the journey back to Egypt. looking at verses 18 through 23. Now that he is fully equipped with divine signs and a designated spokesman, Moses takes some very straightforward actions to close out his old life. First, in verse 18, he respectfully goes back to his father-in-law Jethro and asks permission to return to Egypt just to see if his people are still alive. Jethro gives him his blessing, saying, "Go, and I wish you well." Then, the Lord reassures Moses with a crucial piece of context in verse 19. All the men in Egypt who wanted to kill Moses for his past actions, they are dead. It is finally safe to return. So, Moses gathers his wife Zipporah and his sons, puts them on a donkey, and begins the long journey back to Egypt. And the text makes sure to point out one very specific detail at the end of verse 20. Moses took the staff of God in his hand. While Moses is traveling, God speaks to him and sets some very clear, realistic expectations. In verse 21, God tells Moses to make absolutely sure he performs all the wonders before Pharaoh. But then God issues a stark warning. I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. When God says he will harden Pharaoh's heart, the Hebrew word used here is chazak, which literally means to strengthen or make firm. So God is essentially giving Pharaoh the strength to endure the plagues so that his true, stubborn nature is fully revealed. God is warning Moses well in advance because he wants him to know that he will face immense stubborn resistance from the king of Egypt. Pharaoh will not agree easily, and Moses needs to be mentally prepared for that initial failure so he doesn't just throw his hands up and quit. Then, in verses 22 and 23, God gives Moses the ultimate, severe message he is eventually going to deliver to Pharaoh. God says, "Tell Pharaoh, Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go, so that he may worship me. But you refused to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son." This is such a heavy prophetic statement, because Egypt refuses to release God's metaphorical firstborn, which is the nation of Israel. God is declaring that the ultimate consequence will fall upon Pharaoh's actual firstborn. It beautifully and terrifyingly sets the stakes for the entire Exodus story that is about to unfold. Which brings us to section 4, the strange nighttime encounter, covering verses 24 to 26. Guys, this is perhaps the most sudden, abrupt, and honestly confusing incident in the entire chapter. Out of nowhere, verse 24 says, "At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses and was about to kill him." Think about how shocking this is for a moment. Moses has finally accepted the mission, he has packed up his family, he has the staff of God in his hand, and right as the mission is getting started, there is a terrifying moment of divine anger where God's wrath threatens Moses' very life. So why in the world would this happen right now? Well, the very next verse gives us the simple textual answer. Let's clarify what's going on here, based purely on the text. The crisis is resolved in verse 25 when Moses' wife, Zipporah, takes a sharp flint knife, cuts off her son's foreskin, and touches Moses' feet with it. Zipporah declares, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." The Hebrew phrase she uses is hatan demir, which implies a covenant sealed through blood. Verse 26 tells us the Lord then let Moses alone. So the crucial point is this. Moses, the very man chosen to lead Israel and deliver God's covenant, had apparently neglected the fundamental covenant of circumcision for his own son. Before Moses can possibly demand obedience from Pharaoh, his own house absolutely must be in order and perfectly obedient to God's laws. Zipporah recognizes the massive failure, urgently performs the act herself, appeases the divine anger, and literally saves her husband's life. All right, surviving that intense night, we move to section 5. The people believe the signs, looking at verses 27 to 31. The narrative completely shifts here as the plan finally goes into action on the ground in Egypt. In verse 27, God speaks to Aaron and says, "Go into the desert to meet Moses." Aaron obeys, heads out into the wilderness, and meets his brother right at the mountain of God. They greet each other with a kiss. Then, Moses completely updates Aaron. He shares everything the Lord had sent him to say and details all those miraculous signs he had been commanded to perform. Working as a perfectly unified team now, Moses and Aaron travel into Egypt and call a massive assembly, bringing together all the elders of the Israelites. And here is where we see the teamwork pay off exactly as God designed it back in verse 15. Step 1, Aaron uses his eloquence to speak all the words the Lord had spoken to Moses. He acts as the perfect mouthpiece. Step 2, he performs the miraculous signs, the staff, the leprous hand, the bloody water, right before the eyes of the people. And step 3, the result in verse 31, the people believed. This is full circle from the very beginning of our story.
Moses' paralyzing fear from the first verse of this chapter, his total panic that they would not find his words firm or reliable, is entirely conquered. The signs validated the words perfectly. The second half of verse 31 tells us everything we need to know about how this all turned out. When the Israelite elders heard that the Lord was truly concerned about them and had actively seen their deep misery under Egyptian slavery, their response wasn't doubt and it wasn't skepticism. They bowed their heads and they worshipped. The chapter goes from Moses' extreme self-doubt and resistance on the mountain to a near-death experience on the road, all the way to the entire leadership of the nation bowing in hopeful, faithful worship. It's an incredible arc. Finally, Section 6, Key Lessons from Chapter 4. Let's talk about some practical life takeaways from this walkthrough. When you look back at the chapter, there is a striking pattern here. Moses wasn't some perfect superhero. He was filled with human frailty. But for every single legitimate weakness, excuse, or fear Moses had, there was a specific, practical provision given by God to help him succeed. Think about it. When Moses feared rejection from the people, God gave him 3 undeniable miraculous signs. When Moses was terrified of public speaking because he was heavy of speech, God didn't just tell him to get over it. He provided Aaron as a spokesman. When Moses might have feared returning to the place where he was a wanted man, God ensured those past enemies had died. The lesson here is that when you are called to a task, the gaps in your own abilities will be provided for. So the practical takeaways for us are incredibly clear. First, you must step up despite your self-doubt. You absolutely don't have to be perfectly eloquent or completely fearless to lead. You just have to be willing to take the staff in your hand. Second, embrace teamwork. Moses couldn't do it all himself, so he had to lean on the strengths of others, exactly like Aaron the speaker. And third, obey instructions promptly to avoid trouble. That terrifying incident at the lodging place with Zipporah is a stark reminder that we cannot demand great things from others while neglecting the foundational rules and covenants in our own lives. To recap this entire explanation, Moses finally took that hard step. He left his comfortable life in Midian, he went back to Egypt, he faced his worst fears, and he did exactly what he was told to do alongside his brother Aaron. Only through that initial obedience was the belief of the people unlocked. If Moses had just stayed on the mountain arguing forever, the people would have never bowed down in worship. Action was required. It really makes you wonder, what staff are you holding that needs to be thrown down to start your mission? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.